we rode the tracks in, and you could hear gunfire going on, you could hear explosions, and it's like, okay, we're actually going into war. When we got off at the tracks, and as soon as the door dropped and I stepped off the track, I'm standing there talking to my guys, telling them, hey, get security left, right, make sure we got security so the tracks can drop us and they can go. As soon as I stepped off, there's a dead guy in the street, like a dead insurgent. And, he had a rifle across his chest and everything. And I'm thinking to myself, this is real. That was the first dead body in person I had ever seen it. And I was 20 years old. I was born and raised in Bakersfield, California.
Was there a history of military service in your family?
My grandfather was in the Navy.
Okay.
Yeah.
Why did you join the service, and why did you pick the Marines?
When I was in high school, there was a ROTC program at my high school, and I always had a fascination with the military. Thought when I was younger I wanted to fly planes, and when I went into the ROTC program in high school, that was a Marine Corps ROTC program. So through that, I fell in love with the history and tradition of the Marine Corps. Decided to join the Marine Corps based on that, and for love of the country, of my country.
So you joined just a few months before 9/11.
I did. I actually graduated boot camp the week of 9/11, after it happened.
What's going through your mind when you realized this could be real a lot sooner than you might have thought?
Yeah, so when I was in boot camp, obviously there really wasn't anything going on in the world aside from maybe humanitarian missions, things like that. And when 9/11 happened, we were in the barracks in boot camp, and I'm not sure if you're familiar with Camp Pendleton. MCRD San Diego, not Camp Pendleton. It's right next to an airport, and all day long planes are taking off, landing, everything. And that day, everything went silent. And the drill instructors, they came into the area where everyone was, all the recruits were, and they had a radio with them. And everybody was kind of like, what's going on? And they called us all to the front, asked us all gather around them, and they put the radio on, which had never happened before. And they just kind of let us listen to the news as everything unfolded on 9/11, as everything was happening. And then a couple of the guys, I believe, were from New York, so they allowed them to leave and call to make sure their family members were okay. So it was kind of somber, not really understanding what was going on. And about a day later, the drill instructors were pretty much telling us, you're going to war. So it was kind of bittersweet, I guess you could say. I don't know really how to explain it. It was kind of nervousness, but readiness. So I don't know, because it's kind of what you signed up for. Knowing that I signed up for infantry as well, I knew there's probably a possibility we may be going overseas.
And so then what was infantry training like right after that?
So School of Infantry, I don't remember a whole lot. I remember being cold, hungry, hot, miserable, just out in the field a lot of walking, a lot of land navigation, things like that. Fun, and it sucked at the same time, I guess. So I don't remember too much from that.
What other training did you do after that before deploying?
So our first deployment, we were with the 26th MEU. So we were on the USS Carter Hall. So we were on a ship when we were amphibious tracks. So we worked a lot with the track units and, on the ships, off the ships. And our first deployment was a float. So we were on the ship and we floated. So we actually went into Iraq in 2003, I believe, for about a month. And that was the Mosul airport. So we went up there, secured that, did some patrolling. There was only one firefight that broke out, but it wasn't us. I think it was Charlie Company or something. They were somewhere else. And then once the airport was secured, they flew us back out, and we hopped back on the ships and continued our float, just as any med float does. So when we got back, we had a pretty short stay before we were deployed again, and that's when we got some of our newer they call them boots. We call them boots. But when we get our newer Marines that come in and start training them, we started doing like a combined arms exercise training. Started doing more urban terrain focused, building clearing, just military operations and urban terrain. So I went to a school to become a mount instructor, which is an instructor for training guys for urban operations.
How big of a difference is there between standard infantry training and that specialized training?
So the old school standardized infantry training had to do a lot with wooded terrain, going through the woods, land navigating to certain destinations, walking, whereas urban terrain is more focused on building entry, room clearing, tactics as far as taking down a building, tactics for approaching buildings, things like that. So it's more focused on like house-to-house fighting, whereas the older training was more focused on wooded warfare, fighting in the woods.
You deployed back to Iraq in the summer of '04?
Yes. I think it was '04. I think it was February or March of '04. I can't remember exactly when we went over there, but yeah, it was.
And what were you focused on prior to the Battle of Fallujah?
A lot of that was running missions and kind of keeping security on certain routes. So we would go out to an area and kind of overwatch like main supply route areas. And every now and then we'd, go into like a town or a village and kind of patrol through there and seeing if there's any insurgent activity. We would have a translator with us and just talk to the locals, sometimes hand out some food or, give the kids candy, try and build some rapport with the locals.
Yeah.
A lot of operations also included going to the police stations because they had like checkpoints set up along different routes. And we would go there and myself, I was a squad leader. So myself and like my lieutenant and my platoon sergeant, there'd be 5 of us, 3 squad leaders, platoon sergeant, and platoon commander. We would sit with like a translator with the police like chief or whoever's the head of that spot and just maybe gather intelligence if we could. So, and talk about maybe movements of insurgents or enemy combatants that may be in the area.
When did you start to get information on a pending Battle of Fallujah?
So I don't think we really knew until about 3 weeks prior, because they moved us to what was called Camp Fallujah, which was a small, I don't even know what kind of complex it used to be, but they're small buildings, kind of rectangular shaped buildings with windows, and we would get hit by mortars quite frequently, almost daily, and they would just indiscriminately launch mortars, and they would land random places. They didn't really have any hard targets they were aiming for, just, I guess, hoping they could hit someone. So we got there, started filling up the windows and things of the buildings with sandbags, and then a few weeks after that, we were kind of told, hey, Fallujah's an insurgent stronghold, and there's going to be an operation taking place, because there had been an attempt, I believe, the first time, which didn't work out. The first attempt on Fallujah, where they had to move back. So we were told it's going to be a larger scale operation. And, having been in some of the briefings and stuff, they basically told us there's like a 2-week window where we were probably going to be making a move. So, and then we ramped up.
Just want to get your thoughts on a couple different things. First of all, this is going to be your first major combat.
Right.
But as a squad leader, you're also responsible for the men under your command. So
Yep. What's
going through your mind about you yourself about to enter this experience, as well as what you have to think about in terms of those other guys?
So I guess I was more concerned for the well-being of my Marines, not so much myself, because I wanted to ensure that if we were going into a legit battle, because none of us knew, if it was going to be a legit thing. We had been through other towns where we were told there's, insurgents there, what have you, and it was crickets. I think it really became real when we were sitting outside the city of Fallujah in kind of like a holding pattern, waiting to go in the day before, and you could see them firing upon the city, launching howitzers into the city, dropping bombs in the city. And at that point, I think I was like, yeah, it's pretty real. All right, so there might be something to this. And then it would get dark, and you would see tracers coming from out of the city, over towards us. And I'm like, okay, there's probably actually guys in there, ready to fight. So as we ramped up, I just wanted to make sure that my guys were ready. They had what they needed, make sure they were, rested, fed, things like that, and had the equipment that they need prior to getting on the tracks and rolling into the city.
So what's it like when you finally get that go?
Nervous, that I might make the wrong call, that I might have somebody do the wrong thing. When I was in charge of, with 4, 8, 12, 13 plus weapons, 15. So I had 15 guys that, were with me. And I wouldn't say I was in charge of them. I had a lot of confidence in my team leaders and the guys that I was with, that I knew they knew what they were doing. So it wasn't really just a leadership standpoint as far as I have to control and manage these guys. It's more working with them to make sure we can all stay safe and go home. So it was nerve-wracking, just trying to make sure that I didn't make the wrong decision. And when we loaded up in the tracks, it was, 0 dark 30, as we say. I mean, it was dark out. I don't even know what time it was, but it was probably like 3 o'clock in the morning. And, we rode the tracks in, and you could hear gunfire going on. You could hear explosions, and it's like, okay, we're actually going into war.
This week's episode is sponsored by Incogni. By now, you're probably aware that data breaches are a serious problem. With so much of our information being stored online, every one of us has fallen victim to personal data being stolen. Others have been victims of outright identity theft. Your personal information is being sold or published online without you even knowing about it. And while you can ask data brokers to delete your information, it requires constant repetition. That's where Incogni can help. Incogni reaches out to data brokers on your behalf, requesting your personal data removal, then handles any pushback. The whole process is automated, and Incogni makes sure your data stays off the market, taking it down if it ever pops up again. The examples of how your data is used are countless. Almost everyone has received robocalls. If you've wondered how, it's data brokers selling your number to companies to build these call lists. And it's not just an annoyance. Cybercriminals are now taking out loans under people's names without them even knowing about it, stealing social security numbers and personal information from large data brokers in order to steal identities. Incogni will remove as much information linked to you as possible. Financial information, social security numbers, health information, address and phone number, and even more sensitive info. Visit incogni.com/veterans today and get 60% off your annual plan.
The briefing we got and the aerial photography that we saw of the mayor's complex made it look like the walls on the mayor's complex were like 3 feet tall, and we could just jump over them. And, we had our objectives as far as which building we were moving to, and I was to take my squad. So we all had night vision on, when we got off at the tracks. And as soon as the door dropped and I stepped off the track, I'm standing there talking to my guys, telling them, hey, get security, left, right, make sure we got security so the tracks can drop us and they can go. As soon as I stepped off, there's a dead guy in the street, like a dead insurgent or, combatant. And, he had a rifle across his chest and everything. And I'm thinking to myself, this is real. That was the first dead body in person I had ever seen it. And I was 20 years old, and I just kind of locked in on him and blanked for a minute, just trying to take it all in, the sounds, the smells, the noises. And I remember one of my Marines yelling, hey, Sergeant, what do you want us to do? Sergeant, what do you want us to do? And that kind of snapped me out of it, right? And I was like, all right, time to get to work. So, and then after that, it was just, I guess you could say training kicked in, or, just instinct, or just everything combined, and we just moved, and we got to the wall, and we look up, and the wall's like 10, 15 feet high. And I'm like, that is not scalable. So luckily, I don't remember if it was Captain Cunningham at the time, had ordered the tanks to shoot a hole into the wall. So there was an archway in the wall, a hole in the wall. We were able to enter into the mayor's complex and start securing buildings from there. Yeah.
That's a lot simpler than trying to figure out how to climb it, right?
Yeah.
So the next morning, things got a lot more intense.
It did.
As the insurgents came after you at the complex. How was your squad position, and what were you focused on?
So there was a high-rise building. I think it was 3 floors. And I had my squad in there. I had 2 teams on the second, I think it was the second story or third story. And we had cleared that building, secured it, and that was kind of like our command post, if you will. I decided to take one of my teams up to the rooftop to kind of get a view and kind of get an overlay and kind of get oriented on the map of where we needed to go next and communicate with our platoon commander, and platoon sergeant what we needed to do next. And so I took a fire team up with me, and as we got up there, we started taking fire pretty much almost immediately. And the wall up there was a small brick wall about 1.5 feet off the ground. And, we were laying up top, being shot at. And we knew it was a sniper because you could hear it. You could hear the crack of the round, and it was a single shot at a time, intermittent. And so while we were up there, we were trying to get down, and Lieutenant Dan Malcolm, he had come up with a couple other guys to kind of suppress where the fire was coming from, because I guess they had figured out where it was coming from. So I was able to get my team off of the roof and get them, the team that was with me, get them downstairs. And as I came down, I heard somebody yelling about Lieutenant Malcolm, and I turned around and they were carrying him down, and he had been killed by the sniper. So I looked at him, and that was Lieutenant Malcolm, and I went back years because he was my platoon commander on our first deployment. So he was a great guy. From Georgia, and he was a Citadel Marine. So that was tough. That was tough. That was the first loss that we had that day. And then it was just, you didn't even have time to sit there and mourn or think about it because we were taking a lot of incoming fire. Across the street from us was a huge high rise. I don't even know how high it was, maybe 6 stories. It was a big building. And then to the west of us, we were taking fire from that side too. So it was pretty much like an L shape being fired upon on the building. So yeah, we pretty much held our positions there and fired and fought back, until we could kind of establish a foothold. I think 2nd Platoon had moved to the south of us, and they were engaging the high-rise building along with tanks, and they were also dropping some ordnance on those as well. That building eventually caught on fire. And that's kind of the first day we kind of held there and just kind of fought and maintained position there until we could, establish a foothold where we could medevac some people and things like that.
So that's your first major combat. What'd you learn about yourself? What'd you learn about your squad and your platoon that day?
Resiliency, I guess. As a 20-year-old Marine in charge of other people, you don't really have time to sit there and think about it. You just kind of do. And then I think you reflect later that evening, and you kind of think, what did I do right? What did I do wrong? But at the end of the day, I knew everybody was in my squad was uninjured, so I'd count that as a win. Nobody was injured at that point, and you don't have a whole lot of time to sit there and take it all in and question too much. You just kind of have to act, if you know what I mean. There wasn't a whole lot of downtime even at night, because even at night we were still having to ensure that nobody's coming into the compound on us, having to ensure that everybody has ammunition, is getting some food, getting some sort of rest, whether it's a 10-minute nap here, what have you. So it was busy. But I think I learned a lot of those guys were resilient, and tough. They're tough.
Then the next day, you move out from the mayor's complex.
We did.
What was the key to pushing out successfully and getting across that highway?
So that was tough. So I think everybody would agree that's where we moved to what's called Haji Alley. It was a barrage of gunfire. Just trying to get across there. And I don't know where it was coming from. I don't know, what they were shooting with. All I can remember is just gunfire, like pretty much constant. So, and having one platoon stay on one side and kind of suppress while we cross, and then we would get across, suppress, and then just kind of bounding, trying to get everybody across. So it was interesting.
What's it like running across the highway when people are shooting at you?
Intense. You're just thinking, I hope they don't get me. Actually, it didn't happen running across the highway, but I don't have them anymore, but I had a pair of boots where I was running and a bullet hit the back of it and split the heel out. So, yeah, I don't have them anymore. I wish I did. So
then once you were south of the Fran and you're in Hachi Alley, I mean, it's intense stuff here. This is house to house.
Yeah, it was. We were going, that's where we started going house to house, and, it was gate to gate, door to door, building to building, getting in firefights, as you're going up to these houses, they're throwing grenades out at you. There's a couple guys up on some rooftops further down south from us that were firing at us. And by this point, it wasn't just like individual squads. I mean, there was like platoons of guys moving down these alleys. So we had enough fire support, between the guys and, other ordnance tracks and things like that. So basically what we would do, I remember what we did. We entered a house, cleared it all out. We got to the roof, and as soon as we got to the roof, it was just like a barrage of gunfire just opened up on us. And it was like, okay, this may not be the best spot for us to be. But we were able to get to a position on the roof where we could overlook and see things and kind of provide cover for other guys that were moving down the street. So, and then just kind of, once they got further down the street, further south, we would pull out and just kind of move on from there.
How well did that training you had done for urban combat pay off?
I'd say pretty good. I mean, it's better than no training, right? I mean, it's kind of, once you start doing it, I think you just don't even think about it. You just kind of, like muscle memory, you just know to go in the door, clear your corners, get out of the fatal funnel, and deal with anything that may be in the way. There weren't any times, personally, I can remember where we'd go through a door and there's just like a target, a guy standing there, an enemy combatant was standing there. Most of them would try and use darkness and positions of hiding to their advantage. They didn't really want to confront you head on, one-on-one.
Use the term fatal funnel. Explain what that is.
So the fatal funnel is basically the doorway. So it's a funnel of where an enemy combatant can focus on or train their focus on with their weapon, knowing that you have to come through there to get anywhere to where they are. So that's why it's a funnel. It funnels you into there, and it's fatal because the enemy can focus on that and just wait for you to walk through the door and open fire on you. So the goal is to get through that as quickly as possible and get out of the way of that.
One of the other Marines I've interviewed said that the conventional tactics weren't as effective as he would have hoped, and so you had to adapt. So
right.
What kind of adaptations did you make?
I think we learned pretty quickly not to just rush into a room, to kind of clear it from the outside first, and maybe pie it to see what you could see. And we also would use a lot of distraction techniques by throwing things into doorways to try and gauge whether somebody was going to open fire as soon as they saw something move in the doorway. I know we did that a few times, whether it was, a brick or a block. A couple of times some of us took our helmet off and threw our helmet in there just to gauge and see what would happen. And it worked out a couple of times. There's a couple of times where we'd throw something in there and they'd shoot out and we'd throw a grenade in there, and that would kind of, end that issue. So, yeah.
Once you kind of got to corner them, if they had a way of escape, would they generally try to do that, or did they generally try to engage?
They mostly engaged. They were pretty aggressive. So I think they knew what they were there for and what we were there for. So, I mean, from my understanding, they had been told, you have time to exit the city. And, they were provided ample time to leave the city before we came in. So we did see some that would run, but for the most part, once you cornered them, they would fight.
Let's talk about the Alamo. Explain, first of all, what that is, roughly where it is in the city, and how things got intense there.
Yeah, so I have a lot of experience with the Alamo. I was actually blown up on it. So the Alamo I think it was a 2-story building. It was in this middle of like a field, and on the other side of it, further south of it, was like a row of houses, and then there was a road beyond that. And then to the west, there was another large road. I don't remember the name of them. And then there were houses to the side of that. So once we got to the top of there, I think it was second platoon had pushed further south than us, south of the Alamo, and they had taken up a position in the house over there. As we were on top of the roof, we could see them under heavy gunfire and RPG fire. And I watched a guy fire an RPG from one side up to them and hit the building. And I had a hole in a wall that I had used, a pipe wrench we found, and I knocked a hole in the wall so I could aim through. And as I was looking for him, to take him out, all I remember is a bright flash and darkness. And the RPG hit about 8 to 10 inches above my head. And then when I woke up, I saw that, and then I looked behind me, and Sergeant Leo had been hit, I think, with either a brick or something because his leg was injured. And then Nathan Fox, who was the other squad leader, so all three squad leaders were hit by this. Nathan Fox had a piece of shrapnel in his right, I think it was his right shoulder. So I went to him and started helping him with his shoulder and to help medevac him. And I guess the way you could explain it up there was all hell broke loose. So there was fire coming from the south, there was fire coming from the west, RPGs, and I remember having the weapons guys fired. I think it was a small rocket. Are you familiar with the small rocket shoulder fire multi-weapon, multi-use assault weapon?
Like a javelin?
It's smaller than a javelin, so it's a crew fired like rocket. So it's like a smaller shoulder-fired rocket anyways. But they fired that into one of the buildings that sounded like an RPK, like a machine gun was coming from. And eventually we were able, after several hours, we were able to kind of get things calmed down to where we could move and kind of get out of there.
One of your other fellow Marines described it as you guys being sitting ducks at the Alamo.
Yep.
How did you bust out of there?
I have to be honest with you, I don't remember. We were sitting ducks on top of the roof, and we would put a helmet on a rifle and hold it up just to see if there were still any snipers out there. And every now and then you get a helmet and hear a shot that would crack past you. And, up there, I think the scarier part is that the bullets would come through the brick. So it's not like we were even that safe behind the brick, but behind the brick they at least couldn't see you. So I remember several bullets hitting brick and just coming right through. I can't tell you how we got off there, honestly. I don't remember. I remember getting down, and I don't know if we had support come in with tanks and stuff like that. I wish I could tell you. I don't remember. After that, unfortunately, a lot is kind of a blur.
Talk about the closeness of the platoon. Obviously, the squad smaller than the platoon, but in terms of the camaraderie, I'm guessing that stretches easily over the course of the platoon, right?
It does, yeah. And you don't realize it at that age when you're 20 years old or 19. Some of them were 18. When you're a young, Marine, you don't understand the camaraderie. And now us getting together after 20 years, it makes you appreciate that even more, how close we actually all were, and never realized it. So, we were all pretty close. We would do things together, we all embraced the suck together, as they say. I think when you go through something like that, I think it kind of forges a bond.
What do you remember about hearing the battle was over? Where were you, and what was that feeling like?
Are you talking about when we were done?
Yes.
It was a feeling of relief, just the hope that we weren't going to lose anybody else. We were at the south end of the city, and there was just fields south of us. And when we reached the south end of the city, they said basically we're going to sit here and hold our positions and, just provide security. you know, and we did that for weeks, a couple weeks. And there was even times where they would pick us up in the trucks in the 7 tons. The first time was they took us back to the base so we could get showered, cleaned up, get a decent meal. And I don't remember if that was after 3 or 4 weeks being in the city. That's somewhere in there. It was almost a month. So I'm sure we smelled pretty good. But it was a good feeling, you know, that we were done with operations and hoping that we weren't going to lose anybody else unnecessarily.
What are you most proud of from your time in the Corps?
Probably doing the best that I could and serving my country. I'm not proud of the things that we did, but I'm proud of serving my country. But yeah, I mean, I guess feeling like I did everything I could.